Hello and welcome back to the Midwest Model 916 Part 4, and hopefully, well, I'm going to make this the last one for the radio itself, even if this one runs a little long. As I had mentioned earlier in the video, I was going to check voltages and other things came up. I'm just getting around to it. And the SAMS gives us a voltage chart of everything we should see, and we should have 0 volts on the grids of the 7C5 final audio tubes. And I looked in there earlier and I saw only glass ceramic and what appear, these are ceramic or glass or whatever these are, and these here which appeared to be mica capacitors. So I wasn't too concerned about it, but as I went in there and took a quick look at the grid voltage, one of them's, which they're supposed to be 0, one of them's sitting at almost 5 volts. Probably part of the distortion I'm hearing on AM and FM for that matter. And it means the tubes are being pushed really hard. So I hooked up my Heath kit, and is that in frame? You see the light lit? I'm on the lowest voltage setting, and that so-called, well, what looks like a mica capacitor is leaking like a sieve. It's just passing voltage like crazy, and it doesn't even register as a capacitor. So there's that one there. There's one buried all the way down in here, feeding the grid of the other tube. There's one here on the RF deck, and there's another one up here on what I think is that the RF amp, or no, that's the that is the which one is that? That is in the I'm trying to see where it is in the chain. Yeah, that's an IF amplifier. That's the IF amplifier feeding the discriminator, as a matter of fact. So that's got to go. That's got to go. That one, and I'm going to look around and see if there's any more of those mica-looking caps in there, and we'll get those yanked out. I won't bore you with me watching me do all the soldering and desoldering, but it just goes to show you that even though you might think they're mica caps, you should go ahead and check your voltages anyway. I was working on this and gave myself a real scare. You've seen some of these resistor capacitor combinations, resistor passes through the center. I showed them early on. And through one path you got the resistor, and then through there and outside body you have the capacitor. And I'm in here changing out. There's one cap down there. I had to move a lot of stuff around to get at it. When I finished, I spotted this one with a lead broken off it. Had no recollection of there being a broken lead. The thing was turned down towards the chassis, and I'm like, how did I break that? And where does it go? Fortunately, I have several versions of this schematic here. It's part of the tone circuit. It goes up to the volume control. Doesn't show it on the SAMs, but I had a 1948 Beatman most needed, and this isn't for my model. This is for the other version, the 816. But here it is right here. It's not broken. They're using that resistor capacitor combination. Is this in focus? I hope this is in focus. It's in series. The resistor, the 47K resistor, is in series with the capacitor, and it goes from the tone switch to the tone control and volume control. So that lead was cut off intentionally. It goes in as a 47K resistor through the body, comes out this connection down the outside being the capacitor, and back in. It took me about 10 minutes before I got over that one. While I'm doing, before I forget, I figured out what I'm going to do with the front panel and those two stupid looking pan head screws. I'm going to take that front panel off. I'm going to remove those 2 screws. I'm going to put some kind of support epoxied to the back inside of this panel. I'm going to epoxy it in, and when I do, it'll push a little bit of epoxy through those holes. I'll clean everything up before it hardens, and then I'll run a screw in from the back through the holes that they left in from the sheet metal screw. You can't see it here, it's on the other side. And I'll pull this back against here with those screws from the rear, and then I'll redo the gold and do some careful sanding on the front, and I think I can hide 99% of it. It'll be at least 85 to 90% better than it is now. I'll get rid of those 2 screws. So far, a whole bunch of these have come out, and they're nothing but resistors. They're not capacitors anymore. So back to changing caps, and I'll be back when there's something interesting to show you. Okay, our grid voltages are at the right level now. Another improvement. Boy, that sounds a lot better. These are the days of miracle and wonder. Don't cry, baby, don't cry, don't cry. Okay. I think we've solved all our distortion issues. Now we just got to do some alignment stuff and make sure it's right on the money. We'll do that with you. And just so you have some kind of an idea of what I was dealing with these capacitors, these crap capacitors that were in there. These, let's see if I can get this to focus correctly here. Get a light over here. Turn this one on. These are paper capacitors in a molded plastic case. I cut one open, and they are absolutely horrible. You can see the voltmeter, or the ohm meter out of there. I'm gonna clip on this lead and touch the other end. This is just a standard VOM. That thing's basically a resistor at this point. No, it's not because I cut it open it's doing that. Here's one that's still sealed in its package. This one's not quite as bad, but you can see they're basically resistors. They're no longer capacitors. Some of the worst ones, the one's a little bit better, but they're all junk. So I'm glad I found those and got those things out of there. And I've mentioned this in other videos, but it bears repeating, I believe. When you're working on these older sets and they've been manufactured over 2 or 3 years, try to get your hands on as many different schematics from different sources as you can find. This is a Howard Sams, and look how congested this area is here around the FM ratio detector. Now the Sams had 2 schematics in it. This is the second one, and this has been redrawn, and this is much easier to follow because it's not cramped and crowded into there. But on this version, it doesn't have, down here, it doesn't show you the resistor and capacitor in series. That's hidden over here, and it's real easy to miss. Also of note, this is a 1947 version of this schematic, and if that's in focus, I hope. This version, the 6C4, is the FM oscillator, and it's feeding the grid of the 6B-E6 mixer. In other words, the oscillator signal is fed from a completely discrete oscillator, 6C4 oscillator. You can see the coil going to the cathode and the grid. That's definitely drawn as an oscillator, and they're just using the mixer to mix, period. Then we go to the Beatman's 1948 Beatman's Most Needed, which I have. This is no longer an oscillator. we're using a conventional oscillator here. You can see the center tap on the coil comes to this cathode, and this grid goes to the top of the coil. And this is marked FM AFC, automatic frequency control. That's on the Beatmans. Now both of the SAMs show it as an oscillator. This one very clearly shows that capacitor resistor series section and shows all the switching very clearly, a lot more clear to read on this version of the schematic than it is on the SAMs. But the SAMs has a much clearer alignment, plus it lists all the part numbers and shows you the part placement. So there's an advantage to having both of them on hand. This one here is a Riders. The Riders is showing the oscillator is part of the converter, just like you'd have in a normal AM set. Your converter is also your oscillator. Here it is. You can see your converter here and the cathode going over to the center tap, and then the other part coming back to the grid. They're doing the same thing with the FM here, and again this one's marked AFC instead of oscillator. Same tube, most of the same component values, but wired differently. This is the schematic that was in the owner's manual for the 816. Again, basically the same schematic, only it doesn't include all of these switches for all of the lamps, because the 816 version didn't have all the extra lights on the side. But again, the oscillator is in the converter with an AFC, and this is an actual factory schematic that was in that book, the owner's manual. And that's just back to the SAMs. The SAMs, none of the other ones had the voltage listings. The SAMs has all the voltage listings, so you can go through and check, your grids, your cathodes. Very clear instructions for the alignment, and of course SAMs shows you the placement of all of the tubes. And as I said, on a 16 tube set, when you're looking at the schematic from the bottom, it's like, okay, where is the oscillator? Where is the detector? It's a whole lot quicker. They say the tube is number 5. You come over here, number 5. You say, oh, okay, now I know where to look on the chassis for that tube. Plus, the SAMs gave me all of the parts information, so I was able to verify that I had the right speaker because it gives me the impedances, and I was able to verify that the other speaker that they had in there was the wrong impedance. This is an impedance of 5 ohms, and the speaker that was supplied over there was a 15 ohms. So it's nice to have as many pieces of the puzzle as you can to put these things together. All right, on the alignment, I did all of the AM and shortwave alignments already, and I think in one of the earlier in the series, I can't remember, this has been spread out over such a stretch of time. When I went to adjust these slugs, there's a little rubber insert in there that the slug is threaded into, and it's bonded itself to the screw. And when I turned to do the adjustment for the oscillator coil, it just kept going deeper and deeper and deeper. I couldn't back it back out. I took a little standoff, threaded it to fit, and I just slip it in there, grabbed that slug, and drew it back out. I think I mentioned this in an earlier video, I can't remember now, but in case I didn't, that's how I retrieved those. And then I just took the tuning slug tool and worked the slug in, walked it in, and watched it go up to a peak. And if I went past the peak, then I just pulled it back a little bit. I saw where it was on the meter, and I just reset it. And they're in there fairly firmly. They're not going to move on their own. But now we're set up for the FM, and it's an interesting way they spell it out. They spell it out both in the SAMs and in the Rider version that I have, to use an amplitude modulated signal to align the IF on the FM and to pick off the AFC, which is, can you see it? Yeah, I guess the meter's in the frame there. And that's how they want this aligned. So I've got my signal generator set for 30% modulation at 10.7 megahertz, and I'm dumping my signal. Oh, this is the tool that I managed to find to get down into that grid. I actually tried doing it with a scope probe in the witch's hat to get in there. By the time the tip of the witch's hat was in where it had to be, I could no longer see past my hand or the witch's hat to pull back the hat, and not to mention I didn't have room for my fingers in there. I couldn't get my fingers around the witch's hat to pull it back to hook it on that connection. So this was a lifesaver. They're flexible, and when you push the thing in, it's a gripper on the end. It's got plenty of reach. I just went in and I grabbed the lead and hooked my signal generator to it. So that'll be, I bought 2 sets of these. There's a set for in here, and I put a set out in the garage for automotive work. These are great. All right, you can hear the signal. I'm injecting it in to the grid of the mixer. I'm picking off the voltage, AFC voltage down here, and we'll see if I can get any improvement out of this over above what we did doing it by ear. Oh yeah, we're getting some improvement. That came up considerably. And that came up again. And this is not surprising, because right now the ratio detector is probably not in line with 10.7 megahertz. So we aligned this all by ear, which means everything's probably shifted off the center frequency. So as I do this, ignoring the ratio detector, injecting directly into the mixer with a known 10.7 megahertz signal, because I don't know what the oscillator is set to. You know, the oscillator was just whatever it was set when the radio came in here. Somebody has obviously been turning screws. So we'll get the IF line, then we'll get the oscillator tuned so that it's centered on the IF frequency, and we'll do our ratio detector. Oh, and this has an interesting way of doing that as well. It says simply inject an AM signal, put your voltmeter across the voice coil, and tune for minimum signal, because AM shouldn't get through, or very little of it should get through the ratio detector when it's centered. Let's see here. Okay, that one's peaked. Maybe I should turn the signal generator down. Well, let's see what we get. Well, that one was right on the money. Can't lose them all. Yeah, we got a lot out of that one. Good half a volt there. Oh, and that's coming up. Okay, so we did gain some out of the IF. We'll go back and touch it up again. Oh, it's still climbing. I think I'll turn the signal generator down. I'm going to have to step around the camera here to get up to the signal generator. And we'll bring this down. I'll bring it down some more. There. Make sure the AVC is still working. You got to pump a lot of signal into this on FM to get the AVC to work. Yeah, we're still getting it, so. Tiny bit there. Let's go through 2 or 3 times. Come on, get on there. Oh, that one's coming up. And before we were just doing this off the air signal, just winging it. And I knew it was going to have to be touched up again. What I should probably do when this is all done is hook up the sweep generator and see what the IF really looks like. But they say this is the preferred method, according to 2 different books. Of course, back then, most shops didn't have a sweep generator or a wobulator, as they were called back then. It was, in fact, a lot of the shops back then didn't even have VTVMs. Everybody used VOMs exclusively. I think I remember seeing 1949 prices for VTVMs that were up around 50 or 60 bucks. That was a lot of money back then. For a small operator. Come on, get on there. Vertical, come on. Come on. There. Yeah, I think that's peaked as far as it's going to go. Alrighty. Now I'm going to move excuse me, I'm going to move my VTVM over to the voice coil. Actually, I could probably do this with a scope just as easily. And we don't have to listen to it howling and whining because I can turn the gain up on the scope. So why don't I do that? Hang on a second. Alrighty, we have the scope set up there in the background. And you can still hear a little bit of a whine coming from the speaker, but I don't have to turn it up like so that the meter deflects. I can just use the trace on the scope. And I'm going to adjust the discriminator, and we should be able to eliminate most of the signal because it's an AM signal we're pumping in there. Turn the volume up a little. That should be it. That should be the center. That's the volume wide open. I think that's it. Let's disconnect the signal generator. I'm going to turn the radio off here briefly to do that. I don't want to short circuit anything. Come on, let go. Let go. There. Let's see what we've got. We still haven't aligned the oscillator yet, so.
California are working to determine what caused the collision between 2 helicopters fighting a brush fire northwest of Palm Springs. CAL FIRE official David Fulcher says 3 people were killed in the crash.
Tragically, all 3 members perished, which included 1 CAL FIRE division chief, 1 CAL FIRE air captain, and 1 contract pilot.
sharp pain in your side. That's, yeah, all that money getting sucked out of you at the gas pumps. Again, record high prices eclipsing most of the country right now, and we continue to go up here. But the good news is, $1,000 chances are back, and a trip to Vegas. I'll tell you everything in 2 songs. Rock 101.
Early in the morning, rise into the street. Light me up that cigarette, and I'll strap shoes on my feet. Got to find a reason things went wrong. Got to find a reason why my money's all gone. I got a Dalmatian, I can still get high. I can play the guitar like a mother riot.
I think that's got it. Now I just got to do the RF alignment. So let me get set up for that. Alright, after doing the alignment the way the book said to do it, I just wasn't happy with the sound of the audio. I actually think it sounded better after I had aligned it by ear. I could hear raspiness to loud passages, like it was outside the passband. This is the IF. Now this should be something close to a standard IF hump, i.e. it should come over, go up, have a flat top, come back down and run over. And this is our 10.7 megahertz center frequency, and this is our 200 kilohertz markers on either side. And that's looking purely at the IF. That's not looking at the discriminator or the ratio detector at all. That's strictly the IF strip. And that just doesn't look good. So I'm going to see what I can do with it. See if I can... Okay, what just happened there? I didn't I must have had a bad connection. Still the same shape, you can see. There's our center frequency. And everything, all the gains over here, not over here. So let's see if we can reshape that. Instead of going for maximum gain, I'm going to go for some symmetry here. That's better. Just touching it with the tip of the wand. Maybe I should get my ceramic screwdrivers over here. But now you can see that on either side of the 10.7 megahertz, we're a lot closer to having a balance, which means when I set my ratio detector to here, it'll have equal signal on both sides of the ratio detector. Let me do some more playing, and I'll see what I can do, rather than sit here for 25 minutes fiddling. Okay, it took a little bit of playing, but now we're making some progress. We've got our 10.7 megahertz here in the center, and our 200 kilohertz two 100 kilohertz markers here, giving us our 200 kilohertz of bandwidth, and a little bit of extra on each side, and then we drop off nicely on both sides of that. So now that we have that dialed in, I'm going to see what I can do with the discriminator slash ratio detector. Yeah, this thing's drifted a little bit off center again. There it is. And you can see our two 100 kilohertz markers on that second line from the center, and that one second line from the center, and that's drifting to the left again. These old sweep generators just move around a lot. It doesn't hurt anything as long as the marker, which is set by a crystal, has the proper relationship to the two. As long as this marker is in the proper relationship to those, it really doesn't matter if it's over here or over there. It's just timing on the sweep, but there's no PLL on the sweep loop. In these older generators, the newer ones would have a lock and would stay centered up for you. But I think I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm going to move on to the ratio detector. Alright, it's the next day. I stopped playing with this. My back and my sciatica couldn't take being down here anymore yesterday. I came down here this morning to a cold set, turned everything on, and you remember yesterday, let's see where we are here. Yesterday, we ended up with an IF curve that looks something like that with our 10.7 here and our 200 kilohertz points here. When I turned the set on cold this morning, this is what the curve looked like. This was our 10.7, 100 kilohertz marker was here and the other one was there. Shows you how much these things drift as they warm up, these old radios. And I let it sit for 15-20 minutes just sitting here, and my IF curve came right back to where it was when I aligned it. So it takes a while for these sets to warm up and stabilize. It's been on for about an hour now, and on the scope I'm injecting on the scope you see I'm injecting my 30% modulation, AM modulation, into the IF strip, and we're going to take a look at our ratio detector and see if we can eliminate the AM with tuning. That got rid of most of it. Let's see if we can do any better. That appears to be pretty well gone. Now I'm going to switch my signal generator from 30% AM modulation to 5 kilohertz deviation of FM. And you can see our FM is getting through it just fine. That's only 5 kilohertz of deviation. A full FM signal, you go up to 20 kilohertz. There's 20 kilohertz of deviation. Let's go back to 5. There's a low-level FM signal, and I'll turn that off and go to AM, and we have virtually nothing coming through at 30% modulation. So let's see what it sounds like. Let me get everything pulled out of here so that we have nothing going in but the FM off the air.
Yeah, very humid. Shall be clearing
Okay, we're
out tonight.
sounding pretty good.
You're listening to NHPR, News from New Hampshire and NP.
I don't know if you noticed, but most of the
It's morning edition.
hissing on the S's is gone.
And I'm Sarah McCammon. Rural areas across the country
And on lower
saw a
levels,
surge in population during COVID.
I'm not hearing that raspiness at the lower levels of modulation when the passages get, or excuse me, higher levels of modulation when the passages get louder and the amplitude goes up, or the deviation goes up. That's a really weak signal. It's not a fair one to listen to. You can hear that heavy bass is not distorted anymore.
There's a fire burning in my bones. Still believe, yeah, I still believe.
And again, most of that from the S.
Inside my brain, I was dreaming about tonight. Can you hear my voice this time? This is my fire.
And that's a relatively weak station.
The population served double to more than 300 people last winter. Stroll around the park and there are visible signs of the unsheltered population.
So I'm finally pleased with the way that alignment came out. And what I did is I injected into the IF strip, used my sweep generator, got my correct IF curve, and that puts the deviation centered on our 10.7 megahertz IF, so that our ratio detector gets equal amplitude on both sides. When it's balanced, we get equal amplitude on both sides of the carrier. And that got rid of that distortion. Before, what would happen when it was off center, you're falling into this part of the curve down here with the ratio detector. Okay, I think that's going to wrap up the repairs on the radio side of things. Get our AFC, or no, excuse me, our can't even think this morning. Our AVC voltage connection out of there. Turn off some of this equipment so that the little fans aren't screaming. Those things drive me crazy. I think I'm going to call this one done. It's been aligned, and we'll get this off the bench. Uh-oh, I've got a phone call. Hang on. Okay, sorry about that. My girlfriend was just letting me know she had made it to the hospital. She's over in Thailand, and she got a case of food poisoning. And they checked her over and said, gave her something to settle her stomach down and sent her home. So it's not very often over there. People that aren't used to the local bacteria often get sick, but well, I've been over there since 1970, and I can't remember ever having food poisoning. Even from the local street vendors. I eat off the street food carts all the time, and it's delicious and cheap, and I've never been sick. She bought this meatballs from a market, one of the markets over there, and I guess they'd been sitting out too long. But she's on the mend. I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to call this chassis done electrically, electronically, whatever, however you wish to phrase that. And we'll begin to do some video on the cabinetry work. But for now, I'm the radio mechanic. Thanks for riding along. Hope you picked up some tips. Hope this wasn't too disjointed. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Helps with the algorithm. I remembered the word this time. And we'll catch you on the next one. See you soon. Bye-bye.